September 23, 1883, in the New York Times. The story of Russian Bill, how the Shakespeare citizens got rid of a bad gang. His looks would have attracted attention anywhere, but dressed in the fancy cowboy garb, he was particularly noticeable. His clearly cut features, long, drooping mustache, and curly blonde hair, which fell in curls on his shoulders, Russian Bill was an object of special interest to strangers. 3 years ago, when the writer first saw him, Russian Bill was known through southwestern New Mexico as one of the San Simon Rustlers, a gang of 30 or 40 outlaws that made periodical raids through western Arizona, northern Mexico, and southern New Mexico, stealing cattle and horses and driving them to the San Simon Valley, where they were kept until an opportunity offered itself to dispose of them. When not otherwise engaged, the rustlers sought amusement in the frontier towns and held the inhabitants in a state of terror by their deeds of reckless daring. Russian Bill was a man of good education, bespoke 4 languages fluently, and delighted whenever he had the opportunity in discussing literature, science, or art. Of his past, nothing was known save that he was from Russia, and, as it would have been resented as an insult by any of the rustlers to have asked questions about so delicate a subject, no one attempted to discover why a man of such mental attainments had joined a band of outlaws. No crimes outside of cattle stealing were known to have been committed by Russian Bill, but the man himself claimed to have killed his man on several occasions. His best friend, Curly Bill Brocious, the leader of the rustlers, denied those statements as vain boasts. Curly Bill himself was known as the most desperate member of the band. 8 murders were positively laid at his door, while he himself boasted of having killed 32 men. He often said that the only time he was ever arrested was when he killed Marshall White of Tombstone, Arizona. The jury in that case was afraid to convict him, and he was acquitted. Although his only plea in self-defense was that his revolver would not remain cocked, and when he pulled back the hammer to frighten the officer, it came down without any pressure on the trigger. Russian Bill's chief boast, however, was that he held complete power over Curly Bill and could prevent the latter from shooting if he chose. Bill's reputation was not that of a bad man, but of being a braggart whose heart was really kind and whose courage was doubtful. About 2 years ago, the residents of Shakespeare, New Mexico, resolved to free themselves of the rough element that had for a long time ruled that place. A vigilante committee was formed, and resolutions were passed that all of the resident bad characters should leave inside of 24 hours, and that the first mother's son who came in should be hanged. Well, the next morning, 12 men were asked to leave, and when Russian Bill arrived in town a couple of days later, accompanied by another rustler named Sandy King, the citizens decided that the 2 men should die as an example to their companions in crime. Accordingly, at about midnight, a dozen men entered the room of the Stratford Hotel occupied by the rustlers. Before Sandy King and Russian Bill could offer any resistance, they were tied securely, ropes were thrown over the beam above their heads, and they were pulled up and left hanging until they were dead. The next morning, a coroner's jury held an inquest and brought in a verdict that the men had committed their own deaths. A short time ago, the sheriff of Grant County, New Mexico, received a letter from the American consul at St. Petersburg, saying that the Countess Telfrin was very anxious to learn the whereabouts of her son, who had been banished for political reasons, but who possessed large estates. The letter enclosed a photograph of Russian Bill. Word was sent to the Count that he had committed suicide at Shakespeare 2 years ago, and the true facts were kept from the knowledge of his mother.
The chiefs started out for the buffalo, the hunters following. They stopped halfway before they got to the herd and told all the hunters not to start for the buffalo until they were all ready and everybody had a fair chance. In the meantime, one of the Indians sneaked away to crawl up toward the buffalo. Then this fellow chased the buffalo, and the crazy dogs, or Blackfoot police, took after him. When they got him, they broke his gun, his arrows and bow, broke his knife, cut his horse's tail off, tore off his clothes, broke his saddle in pieces, tore his robe in pieces, cut his rope into small bits, also his whip. Then they sent him off afoot. About that time, the buffalo had stopped again. Then the main body got on their horses and started the chase. If a hunter hit a buffalo with one arrow, he gave a scream, and that indicated that he had hit him just once. There were very few guns in those days, and those were flintlocks. Sometimes when a hunter rode side by side with a buffalo and shot the animal, the arrow would go clear through. The Indians were very proud and careful of their arrows. They did not wish to break them. That is the reason why they shot them on the side, so that when the buffalo fell, the arrow would not be broken. Lots of the buffalo fell on their knees and would begin to move from side to side. Then the Indian, for fear that the arrow would be broken, jumped off his horse and pulled it out. The hunter then tied his horse to the horns of the buffalo, for fear that he might be attacked by enemies at any moment. After this, they took out their knives and sharpened them on hard steel, like the flint with which they made fire. All the time they were sharpening their knives, they were looking around for the approach of the enemy. The fire steel was scarce. We had to use rocks most of the time. The knives we procured from the Hudson Bay Company. When we killed a buffalo bull, we placed him on his knees. Then we began to skin him down the back of the neck, down the backbone, splitting it on each side. The cows we laid on their backs and cut down the middle. We used the buffalo cowhide for buffalo robes. The buffalo bull's hides were split down the back because from this hide we made war shields, parfleche bags, and saddle blankets. The husbands would tell the wives to take care of the heads. The wives took the brains out of the buffalo skull and mixed them with the largest part of the liver, and after mixing well, used the orans and liver in tanning the hides. Then the wife was told to take out the tripe and skin it, for they used the skin as a bucket with which to carry water when they got home. They had strips of rawhide about 3 feet long and 1/4 of an inch wide, and tied the meat so that they could carry it home on the horses. They took the backbone after it had been cleaned of the flesh, and tied the meat to that, and threw it over the back of the horse, so that the load would not hurt the back of the horse. When we got home with the meat, we unloaded. The men who had gone without their wives simply got off their horses and went into the teepee. The women rushed out to get the meat. Mountain Chief Blackfoot.